Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Burtfield, and we're going to talk today for a brief 30 minutes about experimentation. So we're going to kind of cover what we mean by experiments, some definitions, and I'll go through some case studies of what some really good experiments look like. Is that what everyone is expecting to hear about? Is that what we're here for? Generally? Okay. All right, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so this is me. This is where I work. These are some of the companies that I work with. Very broad range of companies, all dealing with the same kind of challenges that I assume many of you here are, which is we need to move faster. There's lots of challenges for us in terms of knowing where we should go, and so we need to define experiments that really reveal the path forward rather than us guessing up front. Just a couple of high-level principles just to talk about in terms of experimentation. So one of the big challenges that I see over and over again inside of large organizations is the fear that if we run an experiment, we may not get the outcome that we anticipate going in. And that's hard for us to do as professionals. We feel like we should know the answers going in. We should be able to know the truth about our customers and about what our product will do. And when we're running experiments, we're really exposing ourselves to the idea that we may not know the answers. And that takes courage. So one of the ways that we see that is it's hard to put out a non-finished product in front of customers. It's hard to put something that's not polished. It's hard to put something that is kind of reflection of what you don't know. So it takes courage. So that's really important to be aware of. Courage is a really powerful and important driver. Yeah. The other element that we need to really be thinking about is transparency. As we run experiments early on in a product's life cycle, what we're really doing is we're exposing the parts of the product that may not be right, that may be problematic, and they may expose data to ourselves, to our teams, to our stakeholders that we'd otherwise like to kind of keep hidden until we've really sorted it all out. So putting the data up front is both challenging but also really, really critical. We want to understand which components of the opportunity we're going after are actually valid, which are not. We want to make some choices because of that. So it takes a lot of courage to do that in the face of a professional organization that is expecting all the answers immediately. So setting the stage. So why do we experiment? We experiment because there's lots of uncertainty. So a few of the talks that we've heard already today, this morning, really talked about how fast the environment is moving, how fast our customers' expectations are moving, how fast technology, how fast our competitors are moving. Lots of uncertainty that challenges us because if we had all the answers, we could just build the thing. Let's just go and get it finished. When we've got lots of uncertainty, we want to move more cautiously. We want to move fast, but we want to move more cautiously because we want to measure our risk as we go, right? So we want to recognize uncertainty and build it down over time so we get to a place where we've got less uncertainty. So traditionally, kind of in the good old days when we knew all the answers, let's say there were those good old days and imagine them, as we move over time, the risk associated with any particular product doesn't really change. If it takes 12 months, it takes 18 months, it's okay because the environment which we anticipated being our reality will continue to be our reality, right? So if we go back in time and think about manufacturing, who our customer wasn't going to change. The materials, the costs, the technology is pretty stable. Today, when we look at our reality, every day really that we are not putting our product in front of customers, we're holding our breath hoping that the design that we had, the vision that we had, the requirements that we might have written, we hope that they're the right ones. We hope that by the time it gets out the door, we've got it right. And the longer we take, the more we have to hold our breath because the risk is going up, because the environment is changing. So every day that we don't experiment, we're challenged by the fact that something could change fundamentally with our vision and our market. So when we think about lean startup and experiments and incremental change, what we're doing is we're exposing on a continuous basis. So if we think about that analogy again of holding our breath, every time we put out an experiment, we're kind of allowing ourselves to exhale a little bit. We've reduced our risk by learning something really important from our customers. So the more we can put our products in front of customers, the less our risk is, the more likely we are to be able to deliver something that the customer actually cares about and the customer wants. So the process of experimentation is really about this putting in front of customers, learning, then moving on to the next thing we need to learn. Okay? We're constantly moving from this doubt to certainty, right? We may never actually get to complete certainty, but we're moving in that direction. We want to get to enough certainty that we feel comfortable with. We want to have enough reduction in that risk that it says it's okay to put this out into a wider market, into a larger audience. And the technique that we're using here is small batches. So very much familiar to any of you who are operating in an agile world. We're making sure that we're not over-investing in any of our experiments. They're going to be small increments of work that allow us to learn just the thing that we need to learn right now, get some validation from the customers, and move on to the next risk. Okay, so we're constantly moving in that cycle. We don't know the specific size of the experiment up front. Right, so it changes over time. So sometimes it may be an experiment that takes us a couple of days. Sometimes it's be a couple of months. We don't need to be too concerned about having a complete plan and consistency of those experiments over time. What we want to do is we want to tune the experiment to what it is that we need to learn. So sometimes that needs to be more robust. Sometimes it's quick. The focus here is not on necessarily the size. It's about moving with speed to learn the key thing that we need to learn. Okay? So when we're running experiments, we're not guaranteeing that we're going to be successful. So the calculus we can think about is we're trying to get to a place where we have more confidence than we originally started out with. So the more experiments we can run, so the more of those loops of learning the key thing that we need to learn, and the higher quality of those experiments, the higher likelihood we're going to get something that is of value to our customers. Okay, so more learning and the right learning equals a higher chance of success. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Anyone challenge that calculus? More experiments, the better, as long as they're the right experiments and we're focused on the right learning. Minimum viable product, MVP. This is a term that is much abused and much feared inside of lots of organizations. People are afraid of the word product for the most part. And so and I'll show you some of the other kind of attempts at defining this. I'm much less worried about kind of our actual terminology that we use, like what is the letters that we use and what is the acronym that we use to describe our experimentation. For me, this definition is the most important thing. We're trying to get to our learning with the least amount of development possible. Every kind of ounce of development that we apply is a guess at this stage, right, when we're early in a product's life. So therefore, we want to do the least amount of work we can to get the maximum amount of learning. That's really what a minimum viable product is. So the word product sometimes throws people off. It's not something which is a finished product. It's a tool for us to experiment with. It's a tactic that allows us to get to those learnings. There's many other versions of MVP, so minimally viable experiment. People feel more comfortable calling it an experiment rather than a product. All good. Risky assumption test, a RAT, is another way of describing that what we're doing is we're testing our riskiest thing, and we're trying to do that in a focused way. I've been working with a company lately that has tried to define their own language set, so they've been calling it a SAVE, a scrappy assumption validation experiment. Just because they're also uncomfortable with the word product and troubled by the MVP acronym, which has gotten them into trouble. And then recently I saw this, a waffle, a well-architected, functionally limited, which is just another expression of we're going to do less to learn what we need to do, right? In this case, we're anticipating potential scale, so we want to make sure that our foundation is sound. And so if we learn the things that tells us that we want to move forward, we've got a good foundation for that. I could certainly make the argument that it's irrelevant because the more effort we put into that well-architected foundation is focused on stuff that we don't know whether we even need because we haven't validated whether it's a real opportunity yet. there's a good dialogue to happen there, but the point is we're focused on the learning and moving quickly through those loops. Whatever you want to call it, all good. Whatever is culturally appropriate in your organization, call it that, but focus on small loops of learning. Learning. I'll say it again, big letters. That's what we're focused on when we're doing experiments. So we're trying to move from as many guesses, so if any of you use business model canvases or any other tools to articulate what is the vision for your product, many of the things that you put down on those canvases and on those boards are initially guesses. And we're trying to move as many of them as possible away from just being pure guesses to something closer to a fact, right? Some of them may never get there. We may have a group of things that we're just comfortable we don't know until it gets out into the real world, right? So how do we do this? So what's our process for experimentation? Oh, so we in the lean startup world, we have this concept called build, measure, learn loop. Just familiarity with the build, measure, learn loop? Show of hands. People have heard that term. So it's a good way of thinking about how we move through our circle of learning. The reality is that what we want to do is we want to start from the word learn. So we're really kind of moving it backwards around that loop. So we start from what we want to learn. What do we need to learn in order to validate our risky assumption? So the biggest guess that we have in front of us right now, that's our starting point. And then we can say, okay, so what is the data that we need to get that allows us to see whether we've learned it or not? And then we can then ask the final question, what do we need to build in order to generate that data? Right? So the whole focus here isn't how do we build something that is the foundation of our future product. It's what do we need to learn today, and therefore what are the things that we need to put together in order to generate that learning from our customers? Okay, so it's really focused on the learning that will give us the data that we need in order to say we're good or we're not good with our particular guess at that particular moment. Okay? So the foundation of that was mentioned a little bit earlier about a hypothesis. So we want to start with a statement of what we believe to be true and how we're going to test that. So it's an if-then statement, right? So it includes the specific action, the timing. So if we do this thing, we're going to see this outcome. We're flipping around our guess into something that is actionable. So that forms the starting point for our experiment. So here's an example that comes from some of the early Airbnb experiments that were done, where they were talking about the quality of the photographs associated with the listings in Airbnb. So their assumption was the better the photos, the more likely listings are going to get bought essentially by the customer. So I believe better photos of the listings will improve visibility, etc. And the hypothesis is, okay, if we take professional photos for each listing, those listings are going to get some amount of more business, so 2 to 3 times was their guess, in the first 60 days of an experiment. So really crisp articulation of what is it we're experimenting, why are we experimenting, and what are we hoping to learn, right? So it's very focused and like easy to understand for whoever's writing it and for the rest of the team, right? So we can have an understanding of why we're experimenting. Different types of experiments. So Teresa Torres, I don't know if any of you know her, she's an interesting thought leader, and she talks about this ladder. So we're going up in value, right? So the easiest experiment we can do is we can just have a conversation with the customer, and we can ask them their opinion. It's good, it's valuable, interesting. It's not as valuable as if we can create something where we can observe them doing something. So we want to move away from a conversation which is a prediction towards an experiment that allows us to see them doing the thing that we thought might happen. So we could ask, in the Airbnb example, we could ask people who might be going to rent Airbnb listings, would you buy it would you rent it if there were better pictures? Right? That could be an interesting conversation, and people say, well, maybe, yes, I don't know, right? It'd be a prediction. The alternative is, what could we do to actually put some professional listings, for professional photos in the listings and see what people do when they're actually using the site, right? That's a much higher value learning for us to focus on. So we want to make sure that we're moving as confidently up this ladder of learning as we can. So our experiments are going to be tuned to what do we know and how far up that ladder can we push. lots of different types of experiments. These are just some examples that we could be running. Some of you may be familiar with these. So obviously we can put paper prototypes, we can do physical prototypes. If you're in the hardware business, we can create hardware prototypes. Concierge is where we're simulating the experience. So it's a data experience, and we're simulating by people running around in the background. So Wizard of Oz is another way of saying that. There's somebody behind the curtain doing the function that you're going to actually have in a digital format later on. So lots of creativity going on to find ways to tease out that learning, to observe the customer doing the thing that we believe they're going to do. Here's the structure again. So a hypothesis about what we believe to be true, what we're going to do to test it, what we're going to measure, what the threshold for success looks like. So here's an example from a company that I worked with that were operating in the payment space. So they believe that urban vehicle owners, right, so people living in cities in India, would place a high value on saving time when they're going to refuel their vehicles through an auto payment system, right? So that's their guess, right? They think it's going to be valuable to the customers. So they're going to go to some petrol stations, some gas stations in some particular town in India, and they're going to narrow it down and say, we're just going to focus on people who are driving motorcycles, and we're going to simulate the sign up for an auto payment system, right? So we're going to create an opportunity to observe whether people who could sign up do actually sign up, and we'll understand whether our guess that it's a value to them was true or not, okay? So they'll measure how many riders participate, and they'll see how long it takes to convert them. So they're really focused on kind of the demand side and also the process side. Is it viable to do this process really quickly? And so they're putting this threshold of success. If 25% of the people who come through this process sign up, and it takes us less than 3 minutes, then our guess will be validated, okay? So they're putting some really clear statements around what good looks like, whether they should say we've learned or we haven't learned. So this is essentially that concierge, that Wizard of Oz, right? So they didn't build any technology. They didn't build any kind of formal payment systems. They had some paper where they signed people up. This was a kind of a visual aid to communicate, this is what's going to happen. Are you interested in signing up? Would you participate in this program? And if so, please sign up here, right? So then it's not a prediction, it's actually signing up. And so this is a photograph of what that experiment looks like, right? So they had modest expense. They printed some flyers, some of those poster things to put up there. They had a few people who went to this petrol station, and they stood there and they said, who wants to sign up? And they spent a day there, and they learned that X number of people did sign up, and it took them a little bit longer than 3 minutes, actually. It took them about 5 minutes to sign each person up. But they learned a tremendous amount about whether their guess about whether these particular category of customers would find it valuable. Here's another kind of a case study of experiment. So this is from the Department of Defense in the US. And so this particular group, they're focused on getting analysis of intelligence data to the appropriate people who are making decisions about it. So there's a progress, there's a speed of data that's really important, and a synthesis of the information is really critical to do that as fast as possible. So they're trying to find different ways to get information into the hands of the people who need to make decisions. So they started out with basically interviews. So these are problem cards. So they made some guesses about the problems that they thought the customer would have. And they said, we think, so the left column here, these are their hypotheses about what the customer would care about. And they put them in front of the customer, right? So they had an interview situation set up, and they put these cards down, and they said, tell us what's your most important value in this process. And it turned out that the things that they thought were most valuable actually were least valuable for the customer. And there's a new set that emerged that they hadn't even thought about. So the experiment here was, let's test whether our guesses about value are true. Let's ask the customer to rank them, and we'll see whether that's right or not. So they learned a lot in that process, that quick experiment. They then took those values and they so this is a really simple paper prototype. They sketched out what they thought the flow would look like, and they put it in front of some of the people who are in that customer set and said, okay, tell me what you expect to happen here. Use your finger to point to the places on this workflow where you would be operating, right? So this is, they're getting various feeds of data. There's kind of a news feed situation. They're building a brief on the right-hand side. So what do you do? Okay, I click on here to get a brief, to get a feed. I add it to my brief, and I press send, right? So they learned a lot from the customer, observing them in a simulated environment about what they thought would happen in this workflow. They then took that and they created a non-clickable prototype. So they essentially kind of just put some images on a page. They translated that sketch into something that was now closer to a vision of what that would look like. And they asked the customers, okay, now we're going to do that same thing again, maybe different set of customers. What do you click on? What do you learn? Well, you tell us what is happening so we can learn what is valuable to you and what this workflow looks like. Then they created a clickable prototype that they could then sit over the shoulder of. This includes Latin text, but there's a clickable version of that earlier prototype. And then they came to another hypothesis. So they had another experiment which says, we've learned a lot from these initial customers. Now what we're going to do is we're going to see if we've got wider demand. So they said, we believe it's valuable to a broader group. We're going to run a publicity campaign, right? So this is simulating what some of you may do in a consumer market. We're going to measure views and signups for a pilot, right? So the observation here, remember I talked about the difference between prediction and observation. They weren't asking people, do you value this? They're saying, will you give us your name, your email address as a signal of exchange of value that you're interested in participating in a pilot, right? So the prediction was some number of customers would sign up based on what they did, and they set the success measure. So they created a landing page and they created a video. And in the video, it basically presented what the value would look like to the customers, what the experience would feel like. There are lots of other types of experiments that you can run, and I'll run through a few examples of those, but getting creative around what a paper prototype looks like, really high value in terms of drawing out learning from customers. 3D modeling is super powerful. This is another one from US government where we created a box that normally would take years to produce, right? So it had some very simple technology in it. It was about kind of identification of who the user was in a particular scenario. And they put them in an environment to see would people use it and what data could we collect. Reebok is a company that has done a tremendous amount of experimentation. Normally, to produce a new pair of sneakers, it takes a huge amount of development work to set up the production line. So they use 3D modeling tools to essentially print sneakers. So they could do a run of 300 rather than their normal run is like 30,000. So they created a small number of sneakers in order to learn, was there demand for this particular style? And they've got kind of an ongoing process of finding out, do our customers care about this style of shoe and would people buy it? Starbucks has a huge amount of experimentation going. This is in Japan. There's something apparently called coffee jelly. This is coffee jelly and vanilla custard, which sounds awful, but they put it into certain Starbucks in Japan for like 6 weeks to find out whether customers actually buy it. So the experiment is, we've got this idea, we come up with a recipe, we put it in a store and we see whether people buy it, right? We're not going to roll it out to every store across that particular country, right? We're not going to put this on our menu. It's going to be the specialty item, and we're going to learn by observing, do customers actually buy it? Small scale to learn a specific thing about in addition to the menu item. Another example, Marriott Hotels. Any of you stayed in a hotel? So they've got a specific hotel which is a beta test hotel, right? So they're testing out different things in rooms. They're testing out different menu items for the specific purpose of saying, we know this isn't yet ready for scale, but we're going to learn from customers what they actually prefer, which menu items they want to see, based on small-scale, rapid cycle experiments. This is another one from an insurance company. So they're trying to work out, should they build a particular product? And the way that they tested it out was not by building the insurance product, which is complicated and takes a long time. They essentially put a PowerPoint deck in front of insurance providers to say, is this actually a value to you? Right? So they learned through simulating what that looks like. They got them to sign up again for a pilot program. So just a reminder, the likelihood of success is driven by the number of experiments and the quality of those experiments. So are you focused on the right learning, and are you structuring in a way that you can actually draw out that learning from the customer? Just one last thought here. While learning is the goal of the individual experiment, we don't want to continue learning forever, right? So Alex Osterwalder, many of you may know from Business Model Canvas and Strategizer, right? Experimentation and learning is just the tactic that we use in order to get us to a place where we can deliver value to the customer. So as many experiment cycles as we can run, but not to infinity, right? So at some point we have to say, enough experimentation, let's go to scale and let's deliver this thing, right? So don't get lost in the learning as the answer to all of the problems. The learning is the path to execution. Thank you.